Hey, so we're back with the Polyend tracker here, and last time we actually made our song and it sounds really good, but it's a little bit clunky. So we're going to look at ways we can use the tracker workflow to actually mix our song on the device. So we can take this on stage and play live, or we can do other things to it, master it later on. So we're going to look at ways we can visualize the sound in our mind so we can create a much better, broader studio mix and focusing on the tracker workflow. So let's get straight into it. Alright, we're back with the Polyend tracker and we're going to look at mixing. Now, mixing is one of those things where a very professional person will go about going through your track and making sure that elements are nice and balanced and not fighting with each other. But don't be discouraged about mixing your own stuff, because it's a really nice skill to have, and there's a few features on the Polyend tracker that makes mixing on a tracker really nice to work with. And when I talk about mixing, I'm talking about bringing all our elements to a nice balance that we want, as well as making sure that elements aren't clashing, so we're doing a bit of EQ as well, compared to mastering where you're pretty much just taking the output of the device and doing a little bit more tweaking on top. So this is where we're starting to polish up our song, and really getting the mix right now means that we can play on stage and we can let the audio engineer deal with the sound as it's coming out, because we know how the sound's going to come out, as well as we can take this into mastering. There's one thing that you need to understand with sound and mixing is that your space is going to affect how it sounds. Like if you've got a really echoey room, that's going to change the sound. It's also going to change the mids and lows and highs. So even if you have like a little tiny crappy speaker versus a massive sound system, it's going to sound different. And really you want a nice constant reference that you can know that's going to sound to you. You understand how it's going to sound different things. And for me, I use this lovely pair of headphones for the majority of my work. But I use it also to listen to music and bunch around. Like these headsets, you don't need to have this brand, but having some sort of headset that covers the full audio spectrum, but has a flat response, so they haven't done any tweaking to the mids and highs. Because once I start listening to a whole bunch of different music and my music, and knowing how it's going to sound on my headset versus a sound system, I can make judgment calls on the mix. The next thing I want to point out is having some way to capture your notes, because you're going to be doing this over a couple of days, but having some way to reference what you're working on, because you're going to be sitting listening to the track, taking out like issues that you had with it, like maybe the drums were too loud or the melody line was too busy, and you want to capture those notes, because it sort of ties into another point, which is ear fatigue, where if you keep listening to the same thing over and over again, your judgment on that becomes less and less. So it's really good practice to do your edits, go away, make a coffee, or leave it for a day, come back, listen to it again, make changes, and keep polishing it that way, because you'll have fresh ears on your idea. You can critically say, was it a good change or not? Now, when it comes to mixing, how do we think about sound? Like, we can't really see it. We've got a whole bunch of faders and controls and that we can actually augment the sound, but is there a way we can see it? And this is a nice little way I've been shown how to think about sound in a 3D space. So the first axis is the loudness that we can use. Like if we bring the sound closer, it gets more loud, so it gives it more presence in the song. As firstly, as we take it back into the background, you start to get more of that echoey, it's a little bit less. So we can use that axis to control the loudness. The other axis that we have is the frequencies. So we have lower end frequencies like the bass drum and the kick, which like to sit down here. And then we have like our snares, we have our mids, which are probably our main lead lines. And then we keep going up to our hi-hats and more airy sounds. And then the last axis, if we think about our speakers, we have the left channel and we have the right channel, and how we move that sound across. And if we think about, say, this pen as an individual instrument, we can bring all our instruments that probably come in like this, but then we can start plonking them around in that space. So like say I want my main melody on this side and my other melody coming from the left side to give a bit of spatial sound. We can bring our kick drum and our bass line. They can live side by side down the middle and the center. We had the hi-hats bouncing around up here, and then we had those chord and texture sounds. We can really spread out our mix in that three-dimensional space. So it's a really nice way to think when you start mixing your sound is how can we fill out a room? Like if you think of a traditional band, you'll have individual band members standing around the room, and you can sort of mimic that flow. Because we are dealing with electronic music, these sounds aren't fixed in space, and we can move them around through the arrangement, which it creates some really cool experiences. So I hope you think about sound like this as I'm going through the video, and when I'm talking about in my head or subjective to me, this is how I'm thinking of where the sounds could be. And I'm experimenting, moving things around in the mix and seeing how that sounds. Like, does it sound good to my ear? Do I enjoy it? And then I'll leave it and come back. So really, this is a nice way to think about your sound. So when it comes mixing in a tracker, we do have access to a mixing console, which in a traditional DAW, like we can control each instrument level here. We also big analog systems where we can control individual microphones to record out. But the tracker has a bit of an interesting way it works with its instruments. Like we have all our instruments here, but because we can stack different types of instruments in top of these lanes, if we were to mix in here, the individual channel might have elements that are a little bit out that we want to tweak first. So it's better to use the volume here to start balancing out the levels than it is to jump straight into here and start mixing. So first things first, I want to mute everything besides the melody line because I know that's got the most amount of elements bouncing in and out. And then if I just play that. So first off, I heard that this instrument 17 here is a bit too loud. So what I might do is just jump in here and start controlling the sound. Now, usually I work in threes to start with. So if I'm knocking something down, I'll knock it down by 3 and then keep going until I find it's at a suitable level. And this is all subjective to my ear. So if I was to play it at 0, it's quite prominent, that beat. But if I played it at 3, yeah, it's quite nice. And really there's a lot of math that's going on behind here about audio. Like the perception of linear audio isn't linear, it's more like this parabolic curve that goes this shape because sound is weird. And yeah, so we'll stick to just keeping it simple for now. But then I'm going to jump back into my pattern. So 18 as well was quite loud, so I might bring that down by 3. And then using the trick where we go shift play, and I might bring that down. Also, same thing, if you highlight the instrument and then go into instrument parameters, it will select that instrument. So I'm going to knock that down by 6. So I find that that's at a good spot, but what I'm going to start doing is bringing elements in, because what happens with audio, which follows on to the second point, when you turn a sound up or down, you can think of it sort of like a pie. So say I've got my drums here and the rest of the instrument, and I want to turn my drums up. What we're doing is we're actually decreasing the sound of the other element. So if we start pushing sounds or pushing the volume of everything up like that, we just keep pushing up the sound and decreasing the volume of the other sounds, but we're running out of headspace on the mix. So it's a much better position to turn elements down to start with, to giving yourself more headroom for the louder sections that you want to hit, and then you can start tweaking the volume to bring it up and down. So that sounds all right to my ears. So I might just bring everything in. So in my head, I like where the drums are. I usually make drums the loudest part of the song. So if I was to play it here, I don't want to see the drum like punching through and clipping, so that would just go bright red. It will tell me if I'm doing it wrong. But usually where the top of the line is, if there were markings on here, I usually like neg 3 decibel for the song. Just gives me a bit of headroom if I'm going too harsh, and then everything else will mix towards that. So you'll see like my drums will be high, and then you'll see like maybe the bass line comes down to say 6 decibels or a little bit lower, and the melody line a little bit lower again, and the chords are sort of the filler in the background. So what I'm going to be doing is still continuing to make sure that elements are working together nicely. So I know all the drums are on there, but I think all the other channels don't have switching of instruments. So really the melody line is the one I want to make sure is all mixed together through that instrument. And you notice I don't have all the elements flat as well, so they all got the same level of volume, because I want to create some interest with the elements, and some elements I want in the background, some elements I want in the foreground. So like that 13 is the main line, but all these like little bits in between, they're brought back out. So 15 might be a bit loud, so I'll go change him. And then I'll check it with everything else. Cool, so I'm pretty happy with that line. Now I'm going to start moving into mixing with the mixing console here, but some people might find it a lot more beneficial to mix with a reference in mind. So if you haven't used a reference before, it's just having some other song in the background playing. And like loading up a song on the Polyend tracker is a bit much for the device, but we can do a sneaky thing where if you've got another device that has a auxiliary out, we can use that with the line in, and then if we go into the line level here, we can unmute that. So we can actually, say using one of my other tracks, and I hit play, I can listen to what's going on there. And then I sort of want to get a like around the same level, so I'm just going to listen to the song play. So if you do prefer to mix with a reference track, we can set it up like this. So we've got our reference that I can hit play on, and then I can use the Polyend tracker to play, and then I can listen to the two and see what elements are coming in and out. Alright, why have a reference track? Now, it's quite interesting because it acts like a blueprint to what you're trying to do here. Say you've got a song that you really enjoy, and what you're doing is active listening. You want to listen intently on the individual elements and how they relate to one another. So if I play my little song here, I know that the drums, the snares, and the percussion elements are a lot higher than the rest of the song. But there's elements of that bass line that's building up that's a little bit less. So that's something I can take from there and apply to mine. But what I can also do is if I go into pattern mode, I'll just mute just everything besides the drum. So I've got those drums. So their drums are quite aggressive to what I have. But what I'm listening for is the loudness good enough? Is it does it cover what I want in my song? So what you want to do is try and find a song that's similar to what you're doing, and then use those to compare with each other to make sure that your mix is somewhere on the right track. Usually I don't mix with a reference. Usually I focus on the song itself and then start listening to it later, but this is a good little technique if you like to do it this way. Alright, we're with the console mixer. So first off, what I like to do is I'll start with my drums because I want that to be my most prominent part. And as you saw, I can solo by holding shift, and then I can start unmuting. So I want to work on the drums first. And what I'm looking for here is I'm making sure that things aren't clipping. As you see, it was a bit red. So I might turn it down a bit so his hard hits aren't going in the red. But yeah, as I was saying before, we don't want to see that line hit up the top because that means we're clipping the audio, and digital audio clipping doesn't sound that good. So bringing the drums down, I'm going to work on the snare in relation to the drum. So what I'm looking for is when I'm mixing, I want certain elements to punch through the mix. So if it's got more louder, it's like that pie, it's taking up more room of the pie. So if you have your drums, the loudest element in the song, when it hits the hardest, it's actually going to duck everything else down. So what I'm going to do is I want the hi-hats and the snare about the same. So the hi-hats are a bit high. Just start again. And I picked a section of the song that is quite prominent with all the elements, so I get a good sense of what's going on, and then I'll go and check with different elements. So with those two done, we'll just listen to the drums and cool, I like that. So we'll listen with the bass line. So depending on what I feel, sometimes I bring the bass line to the back, sometimes it'll be up there with the drum. I think for this song, I like it where it's about the same with the drum. And we'll bring in the melody line. Now, because I've got the bass, I want to make the melody line a little bit less. So there's nothing on that one, and I want to bring this one out in the back because these two take up majority of the foreground. So this is more of a filler, and then we have the texture sound. Which, because it's a little bit weak here, what I might do is just go into the pattern. We'll select that instrument, so when we come up here, and then I'm going to give it a bit more volume. So I'm not pushing the mixer, I'm pushing the instrument array because I did turn this down because of it, how loud it was. And then I can use this one to so right now I find this okay, so I think that's good, and I'll listen to it in context with the rest of the song, which I want to make sure I mute that one. Alright, just having a listen. The second element, I do have that pitch slide down, which was a bit loud. So I'm going to go back to here and control this one. I've done a bit of work here, and really what this video doesn't show is that I've been working on this about half a day now, just listening to the song, playing sections. Oh, that didn't work, go away, come back, listen to it again, or another element popped out that I didn't like. So really what I'm trying to do is come back with fresh ears, because you probably had this experience before where you're working late at night and you have this really awesome idea and you really like it, you save, you come back and listen to it in the morning and you're like, oh my God, what did I just make? And that really comes down to ear fatigue. So definitely use this a lot with when you're doing your mixes, because yeah, fresh ears is a lot better than fatigued ears. So we've got all our levels adjusted to a point where I find it's good. What I want to do now is just making sure that certain elements are clashing, because we do have loudness and we've created spacings between our different elements in loudness, but we've also got frequency, which is dealing with the pitch. So we've got high pitch elements, we've got low pitch elements, but if there's elements around the same pitch, there's this thing that can cause it to phase out. So when phase out happens, you have like a wave. If you have a similar wave that's on the opposite shape, it will actually cancel out that signal, and it creates a bit of muddiness to the sound. And really, when I start thinking about mixes and I'm dealing with things like low end stuff, they're the first things that get real muddy. So I try and do a bit of EQ in those areas. So I know that I have the drum and the bass line, which I'll find a section of the song that has the drum and the bass. So they're both on the same level, and we could use a bit of EQ to cancel out. We could also do a bit of extra stuff, but what I might do first off is I'm going to look at that bass line. So I'll go onto 14 and cool, I haven't used the filter. So the first way I like to EQ is we can use the filter as a sort of EQ. So with a high pass filter, we're only letting the high stuff through. But if we bring the cutoff down, see how the drum's still got its prominence of the thud? But if we start cutting in, there we go, the drum's starting to disappear now. So if we make our bass line just a bit higher than the drums are still going to have that thud, but our bass line is still going to have that. So about there, for my taste, I still get that nice thud of the kick drum, and I do have that bass line still growling. But what happens if you've used the filter already? That's when we can move into the sample editor itself. So we've got our bass line, and I will say this is the destructive method, so there's no going back after your changes. So make very minute changes and check them often, because if you are getting over destructive, you'll have to remake this instrument. So in the instrument parameters, we do have these effects, and one of the effects, when I spot it, is the equalizer. And if we select that, so using this tool, we've got a bit more sculpting options when it comes to the sound of our low end. So I can use this to cut out a certain amount of the low end of the bass line. So when it comes to time when it plays with the drums, it's not going to cause those phase out issues. So really, we're controlling the loudness of a certain frequency of the song. So how you want to use this is if you've got any elements that are sort of budding, like the sounds are sounding weird, check those elements against each other and see if you can control the, start with the filter, see if that fixes the issue. If you take away certain elements of the low end, maybe the high end, see if it's created a bit of clarity between the two instruments. You can move into this EQ stage. One thing that trackers do that DAWs don't, and we don't need to EQ everything, is because of how trackers work. Like each one of these channels, if we had a new instrument coming in, it would cut off the last one. So it's pretty much a hard gate, and it creates an interesting texture that I really enjoy about trackers. So hopefully you'll go experiment with this, see how you can use this on your mix. So we've done the loudness, we've done the frequency. Now we're going to talk about the stereo, because what happens right now is everything's just pretty much in the center, and we might have elements that we can shift to either side to create some more of the stereo field, which gives it a lot more room to breathe. So what I can start doing, say like I really enjoy the bass line and kick being pretty much straight down the center. So if I look at my drum and go to instrument, we've got panning here. So I want to keep that in the center. Same with my bass line, which is panning. But let's say I want to have the hi-hats sort of fading in between each other. So I'm just going to play that. If you remember when we put them in, we did something where we used an LFO to knock them left and right. So this is opening up the stereo field. So I didn't really touch on this in the mix, but this is something I like doing, is creating some interesting patterns with the hi-hats bouncing back and forward. So this is where you can use LFOs to create a stereo field, because what we're doing is we're having it flip back and forth between each other. And how those LFOs work, say if we pick random, the hi-hats are going all over the place. Using the triangle, we could have it slow right down so you can hear it like bounce across and then bounce. That's one way of using the stereo field, but I didn't do anything with the melody line. So I got that main part hitting on the center, but all these little bits, 17 and 18, the two bleeps that are mixed back and forward. So what I might do is I'll pan one to the left, and then with 18, so all I need to do is go do it and make that go to the right. And what else can we change in that melody line? We've got 17, we've got a 15. Let's make 15 pan a little bit to the right and 13 pan a little to the left. So we'll go in here, we go 15, pan that to a little bit to the right, and then we'll pan 13 a little bit to the left. So we're just opening up that melody line so there's a little bit more space in it. So it's not just like it's coming from one point. We've got a few elements here and there. But really, adding this sort of stereo element to the sound is going to make it a lot wider. We also have access to this button here called space. And if we amp that right up, it's really bringing that song out. So it's a nice little feature to have. But I try and do the initial panning, like being very specific. I want these instruments here before I jump into that one. So that's just a little short snippet. Definitely experiment with creating some panning types because it really does open up the sound of your song. Another part of the Polyend tracker is we do have access to a limiter. Now, usually I try and stay away from the limiter in the mix because I try and save that for mastering. But there's a nice little technique if we want to create like a pumping sort of bass line. So right now we've got that. But we can use the kick to sidechain the rest of the song so the kick has more prominence of coming through. And if we go into the master and here we go, we've got the limiter. So the limiter works like any sort of traditional limiter, but we do have this sidechain function here. So in the mix, I want to use the drums to sidechain the rest of the song. So if I play this now with just the bass line and then I start bringing the limiter down, see how it's cutting out the song? So if we get to a point and then we'll make the attack really. So doing this, you can create that sort of pumping effect that you see in a lot of modern music or dance music. So for this song I won't leave it off because I don't think that pumping sort of bass line is going to work really well. So I'm just going to put it back to where it was, which I think that was 0.1. And that was up a bit. And yeah, I'm going to save this for the mastering, which will be in the next video. Alright, so we brought all those elements together with the mix and we have a nice little song. So I'm really happy where this is. It's been a big journey to get to this point, but what I'm going to do is file save, and then whenever it comes time to open up this project again, I can pull this out and it'll be ready to go. Alright, I hope that's given you a bit of food for thought, because right now we are done with this song. We have a song that's a nice mix. We have things that aren't fighting. I can easily take this on stage and play live, and we could export the stems out and do some other bits to it. So really this is a really nice point to be. And with this video I did cover the basics of how I like to master, but definitely experiment, because how I use EQ to stop the bass line and kicks from fighting. There could be ways that you could use the left and right channels with panning, or the loudness to stop that fighting as well. So definitely experiment, and using references, listen to how other people are doing it, which you can take those ideas and use them on your songs for future reference. So it's a really nice spot to be in. So next part of this, I would just do a bit of mastering. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about how I'd master on the device. So if I've got multiple songs I'm going to play on stage, one of them is not going to blast through on the speaker. And then how we can use those export functions to get the songs out. So we get the stereo mix, we can put that into software, we could break up the stems to bring into our DAW to do other things, and maybe look at how I produce a nice little video to go with these types of songs. So having a look at my pipeline and behind the scenes. So definitely stick around for that one, and I hope to see you next time.